Welcome to this YSL tutorial. This is just a short video on how to create and update linked Word tables using Excel VBA. So the video is really all about how to create linked tables of Excel data in a brand new Word document. So we'll start by showing you how to create a new Word document, which is really just a refresher from the previous video in this series on creating Word documents. We'll then look at how you can paste a linked Excel table into that new document, and how you can change the link source should you decide to move the original Excel file or rename it. We'll then move on and show you how you can create and update multiple linked tables in the same document. And then finally, to end the video, we'll have a quick look at how you can make sure that the link source gets changed automatically when you use the save event of the Excel workbook. So let's get started. Let's start by setting up some sample data. It doesn't have to be anything particularly complicated. I just want something that's going to be quick and easy to update to demonstrate that the links are working properly. So I'm going to start with just a generic column header, inventively called column 1, and I'll do a quick little bit of formatting to that cell as well, make it look like it's a header cell, maybe change the font color as well, maybe make it bold, and then I can simply use the autofill handle here to drag that column header across the next two columns. What I'm going to do now is populate about 4 different rows of data with a different number, and to do that I'm going to use a function called randbetween. So selecting the block of cells I want to populate, if I type in equals randbetween and then open up some parentheses after its name, you'll see there are 2 parameters, bottom and top. So if I enter a minimum value of 1 followed by a comma and a maximum value of 100, I can then close the parentheses, and then the key thing here is to press Control and Enter. So if I hold down the Control key and then press the Enter key, it will populate all the selected cells at the same time. Now the great thing about this is that although I've put the same calculation in every cell is equals randbetween 1, 100, every cell's got a different answer in it. And if I refresh the calculations of the worksheet, if I press the F9 key on the keyboard, I get a new set of random numbers. So this is going to make it really easy to demonstrate that the links are working properly when we create the linked table in our Word document. Just before we start writing the code that will create the linked table in a Word document, let's save the Excel workbook in a sensible location. So I'm going to press the F12 key on the keyboard, which is a quick, simple way to launch the Save As dialog box. And I'm pointing to a folder here called Test, which is just in the root of my C drive. So I've just created this folder for the purposes of this course. It doesn't really matter which folder you save this file in, the code will work regardless. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this workbook something like link workbook. And then I'm going to change the file type, so it's not a standard Excel workbook, it's an Excel macro-enabled workbook. And having done that, I'm going to then simply click Save, and now we can go about writing our code. So from here, let's head straight into the Visual Basic editor. I can do that from the Developer tab and choose Visual Basic, or Alt and F11 of course on the keyboard. And then I'm going to insert a new module by right-clicking and choosing Insert Module. And then in here we'll create a quick subroutine that will create our linked table in Word. So let's call this something like sub create linked table. Now we've already covered in quite a lot of detail in a previous video how to write code to create new Word documents and talk to Word, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Just for convenience I'm going to use early binding, which means I need to set a reference to the Word object library first. So from the Tools menu I'm going to choose References, and then from the dialog box that appears I'm going to scroll all the way down to find Microsoft Word, and on my machine it's Word 15.0, I'm running Office 2013, so I can check the box next to Microsoft Word 15.0 object library. Then I can click OK, and now my code has access to all the classes of objects defined in the Word library. We've written the code to create a basic Word document in a previous video, so I won't go into too much detail again here, but let's start by declaring a simple variable named wd_app, which is going to hold a reference to a Word application, so I can say word.application. I don't want to have to explicitly create a new instance of Word, so I'm going to make this an auto-instancing variable as well by adding the new keyword to the declaration. So that just ensures that a new instance of Word gets created whenever I require one. Just so that we can see what's going on, I'm going to make the Word application visible. So I'm going to say wd_app.visible equals true. And then let's create a new document in the documents collection. So I can say wd_app.documents.add. All I'm going to do then is refer to the range of cells that I want to copy. And we're not using any sort of fancy tricks to find the bottom of the list or find the current region. I'm just going to refer directly to range A1 to C5 on sheet 1. And I'm going to apply the copy method to that to copy it to the clipboard. Now all I have to do is paste it into the Word document at the current selection. So I can say wd-app.selection, which refers to where the cursor currently is. So that's going to be in the new document that we've just created. And there's all sorts of paste methods we can use in Word. In the original video on creating Word documents, we just used the generic paste method, which pasted essentially the values and the formatting from the Excel workbook. What I'm going to do this time is use the paste Excel table method. And this one has a few parameters we need to pass arguments to. So there's 3 compulsory parameters. So pasting an Excel table, we can choose whether it's linked or not. And the whole point of this video is that we're creating tables that, when they're updated in the Excel document, they're also updated in the Word table. So let's set the linked to Excel parameter to true. Then we've got a couple of parameters to do with formatting. So the first one is to do whether we use Word's formatting or Excel's formatting. If I choose false, that will use the formatting copied from Excel. Then another comma, and the final parameter is RTF, rich text format. Again, I want to basically use Excel's formatting, so I want the data to appear as closely as it possibly can to the data that we've copied out of Excel. So I'm going to set RTF to false as well. Just before we add in the final couple of lines of code to the procedure, I want to give it a quick test to make sure that the linked table part is working. So let's just execute the procedure by pressing F5, and eventually we ought to end up with a new Word document. So let's just open that up, and we can see that we've got a copy of the Excel data stored in that Word table. What I'd then like to do is just make sure that the Excel document is refreshing this table. So let's switch back to the Excel workbook, and I'm just going to move this around so that I can see the Word document in the background as well. And if I then refresh or recalculate the Excel worksheet by pressing the F9 key, you ought to see that in the background the Word table updates to match the values. So that part's working. The linked table part is pretty straightforward. Let's close down the Word document then. I'm not going to bother saving the changes at this point because we're going to add a little bit more code to the procedure to automatically save the document when the procedure runs. Now again, we looked at the code for saving Word documents in the previous video on creating Word documents, so let's not go into too much detail here. I'm just going to say wd-app.activedocument.saveas2, and then all we really need to do here is provide a file name. So I'm going to save this document in the same folder that my Excel workbook is stored in. That's not a requirement for linked documents. You can save these files in any 2 folders you like, but I'm just going to make sure that everything's in the same place for convenience for the moment. So I'm going to say c:\test \, and I'm going to call this one linked.docx. Having done that, what I then want to do is just quit from the Word application altogether. So if I say wd-app.quit, we'll find that Word closes itself down at the end of that procedure. And at this point, there's no real reason to have Word visible on screen. So I'm just going to comment out wd-app.visible. That was just for convenience to demonstrate that the link was working. And having done all that, all I'm going to do now is execute the procedure to create my new Word document. So just to demonstrate that that part has all worked, let's open up a Windows Explorer window. If I hold down the Windows key and press E, and then if I browse to the root of my C drive and into my test folder in there, I should find that my linked doc is sitting there. So let's double click on that to open it up, and it will open up a Word document, and it asks me, do I want to update any external links? So if I click yes, it will refresh the data in the Word table based on what's currently in the Excel table. So just to prove that that's the case, let's have a quick look at what's in the Excel table. So if I move those around a little bit, and let's just make sure that if I refresh or recalculate the worksheet again in Excel, that the Word table updates as well. So that's all working properly. So that's all working nicely at the moment, and it's all based on the link information that's been added to the Word document when it was saved. If you wanted to see that, you can actually head into the File menu, and this time is in Word 2013, but the same principle holds true for Word 2010 and Word 2016 as well. Probably Word 2007 as well if you're still using that version. But in the File menu or the Office button, if you look on the Info page, then there's a little section in the bottom right hand corner that shows you the links to any other files. So if I click this button here that says Edit Links to Files, you'll see a separate dialog box pops up and lists out all the separate links you've got to any other files, whether they're workbooks or PowerPoint presentations or whatever they happen to be. So it's pointing to the source file using a specific path, C test link workbook. It's set to automatically update at the moment, which means this is why you can see the Word table updating when we refresh the Excel document. You can set it to manual update, but that means you'd have to come into the document and click the Update Now button on this dialog box to update the links. What we're really interested in here is what happens next if we decide to save our workbook with a different name, or we decide to move it from its original location and give it a different name and delete the original. These are all going to cause problems for this link in the Word document. So we're going to write some code basically that allows us to update any of the links in the Word document with the new name and folder path of the Excel file. So let's just cancel out of this for the moment, and let's cancel or close down the Word document completely. We'll save the changes it's updated and refresh the table of data. So let's save that, and then I'm just going to head back into the VB editor and look at how we can write some code that opens the document up and refreshes any of its links. We'll have a new subroutine in the same module to do this, so let's have a new sub which I'll call update word links or something along those lines. And in there we'll need to have at least one variable to hold a reference to the Word application, so in fact let's just cheat for the moment and copy and paste that variable. Life will be slightly easier as well if we have a variable to reference the document. So let's say dim wd.doc as word.document. And then what we're going to do is set a reference to that document by saying set wd.doc equals wd_app.documents.open, and then we simply need to pass in the path of the file that we saved earlier on. So I'm just going to copy and paste from the previous subroutine the name of that document. The next thing I need to do is refer to a field of the Word document, and again that's going to be easier to do if I have a variable to reference it. So I'm going to say dim wd field as word.field. Seems like a slightly odd name to refer to a link to another file, but that's the terminology that Word uses, so that's what we need to go with. So having declared the variable to hold a reference to it, we can say set wd field equals wd_doc.fields, and it's a one-based index, so without knowing the names of the fields, we know that the document we're opening only has one item in the fields collection. We only created one linked table, so we can simply say field 1, and that stores a reference to that field in the variable. Now what we can do is modify a property of the field to update its link. So to do that we can say wd field dot link format dot source full name. So this property refers to the full file name, extension and folder path of the file that the link is linked to. So what we need to do is make this equal to the full name of the workbook that we want to link the table to. So the simplest way to do that is to reference this workbook, which is a keyword that refers to the workbook in which this code is stored. So that's quite handy here because it doesn't matter what we've called the workbook. If we decide to change its name, this workbook will still refer to the workbook in which the code is stored. And there's a property of this workbook called full name. So we set the source full name of the link format of the field to be the full name of this workbook. That will update it to reference whichever file we're currently writing our code in. All that we need to do now is save the Word document, which we can do simply by saying wd_doc.save. We don't need to provide a new name because we've already saved it with a sensible one. And then we can simply quit the Word application, so we can say wd_app.quit. Now we didn't make Word visible in this example, so we won't actually see anything happen on screen whenever we execute this code, but that's absolutely fine. We don't need the Word application or the Word document open and visible for this to happen. So at that point I'm just going to save everything we've done in this link workbook, and then we want to set up a situation in which we can give this one a sensible, robust test. So in order to set up this test, I'm first of all going to close down the VB editor and then close down my Excel application altogether, or at least this workbook. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the link workbook from the test folder, and I'm going to first of all, in fact I'm just going to move it onto my desktop. So that should cause a problem, because when I open up the linked document now, it won't be able to reference link workbook in its original location. If I simply double click linked doc and try to open it up, I'll be asked do I want to try to update the links, and I can click yes. But it won't actually have updated anything. That file doesn't exist, so I'm not provided with any warnings here. I will find that if I go to the file menu and I look at edit links to files, that it's still trying to point to my link workbook in the test folder. So what that should mean is, if I just go back to the Word table first of all, if I then open up the link workbook in Excel, eventually, and then enable the content, you should be able to see now that that table in Word is not associated with the values that are stored in Excel. If I refresh the data in Excel, nothing happens in the Word document. So what I'd like to be able to do now is run the code that will update the links in the Word document to relink it to this table. So let's just close the Word document down first of all. The code that we've written tries to open up the document automatically, so we want to make sure that it's not open already. So let's head back into the Developer tab of the ribbon and then go to the Visual Basic Editor, and we'll simply execute the Update Word Links procedure. So I'm going to run this, and when it has finished, what I'm then going to do is go back to the Word document and open it up again, and then I'm going to choose to update the links by clicking yes, and then finally I'm going to go back to the Excel file, and you can see already that the Word table has updated its data. So if I were to refresh the Excel spreadsheet again by pressing the F9 key, you'll see that the table has now been linked again. Okay, so that works great for just one single field in the same Word document, but what if we had lots to update at the same time? Let's set up a situation where we've got multiple tables in the Word document and we want to refresh every single link or every single field at the same time. Let's close down the Word document first of all, and we'll save the changes to it, and then I'm going to maximize my Excel window again and think about how we can set up a situation where we've got multiple fields to update. The simplest way to demonstrate updating multiple links is just to have several copies of this same table, and we could just copy and paste the cells into different regions on the same worksheet, but just to make life a little bit easier, let's make some duplicates of this worksheet. Simplest thing to do here, if you hold down the Control key and then click and drag on the worksheet you want to duplicate, as soon as you release the mouse button, and as long as you do that before you release the Control key, it will create a completely separate copy of the same sheet. Let's do that again. Hold down Control and create another copy of the sheet, and then you'll see that each sheet has its own different set of values on it. Just to distinguish them a little more clearly, I want to change the column headings. I want to change the formatting of the column headings. So I'm going to select the column headings on sheet 2, and let's make those red, and then we can go to the third sheet and I can select the same cells on there, and let's make those green. Okay, so we've got three completely clearly distinct separate sheets. What we'll do now is head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we'll write a little bit of code that creates a new table in a single Word document for each one of those sheets in the workbook. Let's do this in a new module as well to keep it separate from our original code, but we are going to make use of the original code we've written, so before I create the new module, I'm going to copy everything out of this one using Ctrl-C on the keyboard, and then we can insert a new module and then just paste that code straight in. What I'll then do is rename the first subroutine as Create Multi-Linked Table, and then I'll change the name of the second subroutine so it says Update Multiple Word Links or Multi-Word Links. I'm feeling a bit lazy. In the Create Multi-Link Table example then, what we'll need to do is create a new variable which will allow us to loop over the separate worksheets that contain the data we want to copy. So let's have a new variable which I'm just going to call it WS as worksheet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a loop so that once we've created a new document, as we have here, rather than just copy and paste sheet 1 range A1 C5 copy, sheet 2 range A1 C5 copy, what we're going to do instead is say for each WS in worksheets, and then instead of saying sheet 1 here, I'm going to replace sheet 1 by saying ws.range A1 to C5.copy, so it's the same range of cells on each sheet. What we can then do, if I just indent those two lines just to tidy up a little bit, is paste them into the Word document, pasting it as an Excel table with a linked table, just as we did earlier, and then just to add a little bit of space between each table we're going to paste in, I'm going to say wd_app.selection.type_paragraph. So that types essentially a carriage return into the document, gives us a bit of space between each table. We've just got to close the loop now by saying next WS, and of course we've written for each loops in many examples over the course of these videos in this tutorial series. The fantastic thing about for each loops is that they always process all of the objects in the collection that you've referenced. So whether I had 3 worksheets or 300, I'd get a new Word table. Hopefully you don't have a document that's got 300 separate worksheets in it, that would be quite long and tedious to run, but this one's going to create a new Word document with 3 tables in it. Let's just modify the name of the document that gets created. Let's call this one multi-linked doc. And then having done all that, let's just save what we've done in the Excel workbook before we give this one a quick test to generate that new document. Okay then, just to prove that that part's worked, let's head back to our test folder and let's open up this new multi-linked doc that's been created for us. And we ought to find that in here, if I choose yes to update the changes, I've got a document that does indeed have 3 separate tables with different coloured column headings, and each one of those tables is linked to the appropriate set of cells in the Excel workbook. So if I look at table 1, the blue table, that looks pretty sensible, everything matches. If I hit F9 to recalculate it, of course F9 recalculates the entire workbook, but it also updates the data in the table in the red table and also in the green table on sheet 3 as well. So every time I recalculate the sheet, by pressing F9, it will update all the Word tables as well. Now of course these 3 links are built on the same principles as the original link that we had in the first document. Let's have a quick look in the File menu of Word, and then let's have a look at the Edit Links to Files, and we ought to find that this time there's more than one link, so there's more than one field to update. So the next job is to write some code that updates all of the fields. Let's just cancel out the dialog box first and we'll close Word down completely and save the changes to the document, and then we'll head back to Excel, and then we will head back to the Visual Basic Editor and we'll modify the Update Multi-Word Links procedure. Now although we could use a for each loop to loop through all of the fields in the document, I've discovered there's a small issue if you use that type of loop to update the source of all the fields. For some bizarre reason, you end up stuck in an infinite loop. So I don't know, I haven't researched the exact technical reason for that, it's something I'm going to do after the video, but because that happens, we're not going to use a for each loop to update all the fields. We're going to use a slightly more old-fashioned for next loop. And again, we've made a video on for next loops as part of this series, but the basic idea of a for next loop is that rather than using an object variable to hold a reference to an object, you use a simple counter instead. So I'm going to say dim I as integer in place of dim wd field as word.field. We then want to make sure that we're opening up the correct document, so not linked document, it's multi-linked doc. And then we can remove this little reference here to set a reference to fields 1. What we're going to do instead, in fact let's just remove this bit here where it says set wd field to fields 1. What we're going to do instead is we're going to use our integer variable to count through the individual fields. So to make that work, what we're going to do is have a for next loop. We're going to say for I equals 1, 2, and then you need to enter the value of the final number that it counts to. So if we know that there are 3 links, we could just state the number 3. However, we don't know that there might be 300 links in the document. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to say wd_doc.fields, and I'll spell that properly, fields.count. So that tells us how many there are. Okay, what we can do now is instead of referring to, say, fields 1, fields 2, etc. explicitly, we can replace the number here with a reference to the counter variable, I. And then all we need to do is update the link format source full name for that single field. So I can remove the reference to the field there again. So just to wrap up the loop, just to close it, we can say next I. So this sort of loop will essentially carry out the same job, the same role as a for each loop, but without this little danger of getting stuck in an infinite loop. So in this case for ours it will loop 3 times round, updating each field's source full name to the workbook's full name. Okay, so at this point we're ready to give the entire system a quick test. Let's just save what we've done in the Excel workbook, and then we can close down the VB editor and close down the workbook itself. And then essentially all we're going to do is the opposite of what we did previously. I'm going to move the link workbook from the desktop back into its original folder called test. Simply having done that, we've broken all the links in the multi-linked doc, so that was still referring to the desktop version of that file. So let's open up the link workbook again, so that we can execute the code in it. And when it's opened, we can head straight back to the VB editor. And if we find the update multi-word links procedure, we can simply execute this to update all of the links. Once that's been done, we should just check finally that the Word document has been updated. So let's head back into the test folder and then open up multi-linked doc. And if we choose yes to refresh the links, head back to the file menu and then click on the edit links to files option again, and then just check that we've reset the source file for every single link to point back to the test folder from the desktop. Okay, so that's all working. I'm just going to cancel out of that dialog box, close down the Word document and save the changes, and that's basically it for how you update multiple links in a Word document. Just as one final idea to wrap up this video, of course we've been manually moving our Excel file around to demonstrate the breaking of links between documents. But of course, if you saved your Excel workbook with a different name, that would have a similar effect. Now, rather than having to manually execute the update multi-word links procedure to update all the links after you've saved the document, what we could do is tie in a call to this procedure to the save event of the workbook. So what I'm going to do at this point is just head into the This Workbook object by double-clicking on it, and then have a look at one of its events by selecting the drop-down list at the top left. I'm going to choose Workbook, and then after that I'm going to go to the drop-down list at the top right, and I'm going to choose the After Save event. Now technically all you need to do here is make a call to the update multi-word links procedure in the after save event. So if I just do that by writing update multi-word links, I could of course put the call keyword in front of that just to indicate that I'm making a call to a procedure I've written rather than a built-in Excel native method, but I'm just going to remove that for the time being. We don't need that. So at this point, as long as my workbook saves successfully, it will immediately call that procedure and then update all the word links. The small problem with that is that it will do that regardless of whether I've changed the file name or not. If I just hit the save button up here right now, what it would do is execute that, even though it's not necessary. To ensure that this is only triggered if the file name or location changes, what we could do is store the original file name before the workbook is saved. So to make that work, we could use the before save event of the workbook. So going back to the drop down list at the top right, I could choose before save, and here we've got an opportunity to save the current or the original workbook's name. In order to make that available, we'd need to have a global variable or a public variable. So at the top of the Workbook's code page, I'm going to create a private variable. Private in that it's private to this module, if you like. So I'm going to say private original name or original file name as string. And then when we choose to save the workbook, but before it is actually saved, what we can do is say original file name equals this workbook dot full name. So it's the same property we were using earlier on to reset the link. Then in the after save event, what we can do is check if original file name is not equal to this workbook dot full name, then update multi-word links. I'm going to write it as a block if and place an end if at the end. So now this should only take effect if we've changed the file name. So if I just save what I've done so far, what we should find is that if I just save it, it doesn't appear to take very long at all, so it just saves immediately. It means it's not triggering this code here at all. So if I were just to set a breakpoint on the after save event by clicking into the grey bar just to prove that that's happening, if I hit save, it triggers the before save and the after save. So the original file name is C test link workbook and the full name is C test link workbook. So hitting F8 will jump over the if statement and then end the subroutine. If I choose to save this with a different name, however, something different should happen. So let's just reset the breakpoint to demonstrate this, and I'm going to head back into Excel and then use the F12 key to perform a save as. So I hit F12, save as, and let's plonk this back on my desktop. So I'll call it, so I'm putting it on the desktop, I'll give it a slightly different file name as well, link Workbook 2, just to be inventive, and then click the Save button. Now this time you'll see that the original file name is still C test link workbook, but the new name is the path to my desktop with a slightly different file name. So if I hit F8, this time it will step into the loop and, step into the if statement, and it will make a call to the update multi-word links. So let's just hit F5 to continue the rest of the procedure without stepping through, and it'll take a little time for it to work, but eventually now it's finished. If you wanted to provide yourself with a little bit more flexibility, you could always add in a quick message box to ask the user whether they wanted to update the links. So imagine if I just removed my breakpoint. If the original file name changes, then we could ask the user whether they would like to update the links. So in the after save event, we could declare a new variable. Let's call it button clicked, something along those lines, as a VB message box result. What we'll then do is, inside the original if statement, we'll display a message box and store its result in the button clicked variable. So we'll say button clicked equals message box, and then open some parentheses and ask the user update links, or update word links. We could ask them a more elaborate question if I had more time or less laziness, I suppose, to type in a question. So update links, followed by a comma, and then we'd also like to display a VB question symbol on the message box, plus VB yes no buttons, close the parentheses, and then at that point we'll have either VB yes or VB no stored in the variable. So we could then say if button clicked equals VB yes, then I want to update the multi-word links. I'm just going to bring that back onto a single continuous line, so I don't want to have a separate block if within the original one. So, okay, having done all that, let's just give this system a quick little final test. Once again, if I were to save this one now without changing its name, you'll see that this time nothing happens at all. I don't see anything. But if I switch back into Excel and then I hit the F12 key to perform a save as, let's store this. I'll just store this on my desktop again, but I'll change the name of the file so it's inventively linked workbook 3, and then click save. Now at this point, because the file name has changed, it wants to know if I want to update the links to my Word document, and if I were to click no, then that wouldn't happen, but if I click yes, it will take a little while for that to happen and update the Word document, and eventually all that's been done. So, hope you've got a bit of an idea now about how you can create linked word tables using Excel VBA, how you can update them, and how to make sure that those names always get updated when you save your workbook with a different name. Hope that's been helpful. Thanks for watching, see you next time. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseOwl website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching, see you next time.